I wouldn't have said so, no. Not really. But no, I don't get the feeling that she's wildly optimistic about life. A pragmatist, I think.
The decision arrived without applause, warning, or room for negotiation. Inside a sealed royal chamber, Princess Anne placed her signature beneath an order claiming permanent custodianship of Queen Elizabeth II's forbidden private jewel collection. At that exact moment, Camilla's formal request to wear pieces from the collection was stamped "Denied." One signature had transferred more than gemstones. It had redrawn the balance of power inside the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. These were never ordinary crown jewels, displayed beneath ceremonial lights and brought forward whenever tradition demanded grandeur. They were deeply personal possessions, connected to Queen Elizabeth II's private memories, family promises, quiet loyalties, and instructions that had remained beyond public reach. Some marked intimate anniversaries. Others carried painful associations, known only to a trusted few. The collection represented a hidden history of the House of Windsor, and the late monarch had reportedly made one condition unmistakable. These pieces were not to become ornaments of convenience for whoever happened to occupy the highest rooms of the palace. Princess Anne remained outwardly controlled as she studied the final document, yet her hand paused above the signature line. She understood exactly what approval would mean. The Princess Royal was not merely accepting responsibility for her mother's jewels. She was delivering a calculated humiliation to the Queen Consort. Anne knew Camilla had already submitted a formal schedule, requesting several pieces for future banquets, state visits, and anniversary ceremonies. Once the order was signed, every one of those plans would collapse. Still, the royal daughter lowered the silver fountain pen and completed her name. In her private sitting room, Camilla received the rejection without ceremony. She read the opening paragraph once, then again. As though repetition might change its meaning, it did not. The paper slowly dropped toward her lap, while disbelief hardened into anger. This was not a temporary postponement or a cautious palace compromise. Her access had been blocked under the same order that handed permanent control to Anne. Worse still, a palace secretary quietly removed the proposed jewel schedule from the coronation archive, confirming that the decision would reach far beyond one appearance. Then came the clause that transformed embarrassment into something far more threatening. Written by hand and attributed to the late Queen were the words declaring that access must be decided by the senior royal who preserved duty without personal ambition. There was no title attached, but the meaning was brutally clear. Elizabeth had chosen Anne because she trusted her judgment and because she feared someone else's ambition. The Princess Royal closed the leather folder, faced the waiting official, and said, "The instruction will stand exactly as written." The document explained what had happened, but not why the restriction had suddenly been activated. And as Camilla stared at the word "denied," the palace was forced to confront the far more dangerous question of why the late Queen had prepared for this moment at all. To the public, the dispute concerned diamonds, pearls, and royal protocol. Inside the family, it was painfully personal. Princess Anne saw the collection as the last private language she shared with her mother. Camilla saw access as recognition that her long and difficult journey into royal life had finally been accepted. Neither woman believed she was fighting merely for jewelry. Each believed the decision would define her place in history. For Princess Anne, the collection was inseparable from Queen Elizabeth II herself. The disciplined daughter had spent decades serving without demanding applause, protecting private family matters, while others turned royal possessions into symbols of rank. She understood that her mother rarely viewed jewelry as decoration alone. Every piece carried memory, obligation, and sometimes a warning. Anne still remembered a private family dinner when Elizabeth fastened a sapphire brooch to her dress and quietly explained that certain objects carried responsibility rather than privilege. The words had stayed with the Princess Royal because they sounded less like conversation and more like an instruction intended for the future. Camilla's pain came from another place. She had endured years of public hostility, brutal judgment, and whispers that followed her through every palace doorway. Becoming queen consort had given her a title, but not always the sense of acceptance she believed the title should bring. To her, wearing pieces from Elizabeth's private collection would signal that the long battle for legitimacy was finally over. When she told King Charles that Anne's rejection made her feel tolerated rather than trusted, she tried to remain composed, yet her voice broke slightly, exposing the wound beneath the anger. Her request had been precise. Camilla wanted access to Elizabeth's private diamond fern brooch, a pearl riviere kept away from public records, and an emerald bracelet that had not been worn publicly since 1987. But Anne soon discovered that the application went far beyond one banquet or state occasion. It sought continuing access under the queen consort's personal authority, including the power to choose pieces without first consulting the collection's custodian. That detail changed everything. To the Princess Royal, it was no longer a request for recognition. It was an attempt to weaken the very safeguards her mother had created. Charles reached for his wife's hand, hoping to calm the rising tension, but Camilla withdrew it before he could close the distance. Then she asked the question he had been avoiding. Had he known that Anne possessed final authority before the rejection arrived? His hesitation gave her the answer she feared. The silence between them became heavier than any accusation. Yet Anne's refusal was not driven by rivalry alone. Behind the formal order stood a specific incident, one involving Camilla, Elizabeth, and a promise that had been quietly broken. The late monarch had never spoken of it publicly, but she had ensured that its consequences would survive her. That buried moment would transform a painful family disagreement into something far more serious, a broken promise preserved inside the palace for years. Here is the next section. The true beginning of the crisis came years earlier, during a private Windsor Castle dinner that was never listed in any court circular. Queen Elizabeth had agreed to discuss the future of her personal jewels with Charles, Anne, and Camilla. The conversation began politely. It ended with the late monarch rising from the table, ordering the collection secured, and telling her equerry that no future request would be approved without Anne's consent. By then, Queen Elizabeth II had already begun quietly organizing her personal possessions. Age had forced decisions that duty had once allowed her to postpone, and she understood that uncertainty could turn precious heirlooms into instruments of conflict. Princess Anne was included because she knew the crucial difference between ceremonial assets belonging to the crown, inherited family property, and private pieces carrying instructions that could not be rewritten by rank. Charles attended as the future sovereign. Camilla entered, believing the discussion would finally clarify her place within that future. At first, the exchange remained restrained. Then the queen consort suggested that selected jewels could eventually become part of her official wardrobe, creating what she called continuity before the public. The proposal sounded practical, but Elizabeth heard something colder beneath it. Private memories were being discussed as institutional symbols, ready to be absorbed into a new reign. Anne noticed her mother's expression change. Patience vanished first. What replaced it was unmistakable disappointment. The decisive moment came without warning. Camilla lifted the emerald bracelet from its open presentation case, placed it against her wrist, and asked King Charles III whether it would suit the next state banquet. Permission had not been given. The late queen's reaction was immediate. She took the bracelet, returned it to its place, and closed the case herself. "Then this collection requires a guardian," she said. In that sentence, the future was decided. After Charles and his wife departed, Elizabeth dictated a private memorandum that would later become known within a small palace circle as the Windsor Custodianship Clause. It placed the restricted pieces beyond the automatic reach of any future consort and gave the Princess Royal authority over every request. This was no impulsive punishment. It was a safeguard, built from disappointment. written to survive affection, pressure, and even succession. Anne remained alone with her mother after the room had emptied. The monarch pushed a small key across the table and told her, "One day, you may have to disappoint someone you love." The daughter understood that the warning included Charles as much as Camilla. Years later, when the new request arrived, that quiet sentence returned with brutal force. Anne was no longer remembering a family disagreement. She was being commanded to complete an unfinished duty. When Anne finally entered the room to face Camilla, she was not arriving as a rival, but as the keeper of a promise neither woman could escape. Here is the next section. No aides were present when Princess Anne and Camilla finally faced one another. The meeting took place behind a closed door in Clarence's house, with the rejected request lying between them. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Camilla pushed the document across the table and asked whether Anne had blocked her as custodian of the jewels, or as the daughter who had never truly forgiven her. Princess Anne had agreed to the private meeting only because King Charles wanted the dispute contained before upcoming public engagements forced the family to stand together. One careless remark could expose the fracture. Camilla entered believing the order might still be revised, especially if she reduced her request to a single brooch for one state occasion. She did not ask for the entire collection this time. She asked for one exception, one gesture, one sign that the door had not been closed forever. Anne refused to offer false hope. That restraint pushed the Queen Consort beyond caution. Camilla accused her of using Queen Elizabeth II's memory to keep her permanently outside the family's emotional center. Years of service, loyalty, and public endurance, she argued, had changed nothing. She possessed the title, carried the duties, and stood beside the king, yet Elizabeth's daughter still treated her like a tolerated visitor. The Princess Royal's answer was cold but controlled. The jewels were not rewards for endurance, she said, and suffering did not create ownership. Her mother's private boundaries could not be erased simply because the reign had changed. Camilla then revealed the promise she had been holding back. Charles had informally assured her that the emerald bracelet would eventually become available. Suddenly, the argument was no longer between two women. The king's private word now stood against the late queen's written restriction. Anne opened the custodianship file and removed a second page. Camilla rose so abruptly that her chair scraped across the floor, but her opponent did not move. Instead, Anne quietly turned the document toward her. The instructions specifically named the emerald bracelet as a piece that could never be reassigned to a reigning consort. There was no vague language, no opening for reinterpretation, and no authority granted to Charles to make an exception. Camilla read the passage once, then again. The anger left her face, replaced by something far more painful. She lowered herself into the chair and whispered that Elizabeth must have expected her to fail. Anne offered no reassurance, because anything gentle would have sounded dishonest. She had defended her mother's command, but in doing so, she had deepened her brother's crisis. The meeting ended without reconciliation. Charles was now trapped between his wife's humiliation and his sister's unbreakable authority, knowing that supporting either woman would wound the other. But the next decision would not belong to emotion alone, because behind Anne's refusal stood a legal and constitutional structure even the king could not casually overturn. Here is the next section. King Charles entered the Privy Library believing he could soften the crisis. What he discovered was that his mother had designed the arrangement precisely to prevent intervention from the throne. The restricted collection had been placed under a private custodial trust, supported by signed inventories, witness statements, and conditions that survived the sovereign who created them. For once, Charles possessed the crown, but not the power to grant his wife what she wanted. Queen Elizabeth II had deliberately separated the forbidden pieces from jewels, managed through normal royal household arrangements. The collection was governed by private instructions, each item recorded beside strict conditions concerning preservation, movement, and public use. Princess Anne's authority was therefore far more than ceremonial. She controlled access, documentation, loans, security, and every circumstance under which a jewel could leave its protected setting. No title, not even that of sovereign, could casually erase the responsibility Elizabeth had placed in her daughter's hands. For Charles, the discovery carried a painful personal cost. He had reassured Camilla that the emerald bracelet might one day become available, believing that succession would give him the freedom to settle the matter. That promise had encouraged his wife to hope, and hope had now become humiliation. Anne understood her brother's guilt. She also understood that yielding would turn their mother's final safeguard into an empty gesture. The Princess Royal disliked opposing Charles, but she refused to let family regret become an excuse for breaking Elizabeth's command. The king read the trust summary alone. When he reached the final condition, he removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. His mother had anticipated his exact objection, that a reigning monarch should retain the power to resolve a private family dispute. Yet the document answered him before he could speak. The authority belonged to Anne because the crown itself had been identified as a possible source of pressure. Then the royal solicitor revealed the narrow path that remained. Charles could challenge the arrangement privately, but doing so might expose Elizabeth's restrictive memorandum, the Windsor dinner, and the moment Camilla handled the bracelet without permission. Worse followed. A sealed annex stated that any effort to bypass the appointed custodian would automatically transfer the entire collection into a protected family foundation, placing every restricted piece beyond personal use by all senior royals. Charles closed the annex slowly and looked directly at his sister. "She left me no path that does not damage someone." Anne did not celebrate the victory. She knew the denial would wound Camilla, strain her brother, and deepen suspicions across the household. But the late queen had made the alternative even harsher. An intervention was impossible without risking the collection itself, and the refusal was now permanent. By the following morning, the blocked request was no longer confined to a leather folder. It had begun altering ceremonies, alliances, and the way the palace treated Camilla herself. Here is the next section. The first public consequence appeared on a state banquet wardrobe sheet. Beside Camilla's name, the emerald bracelet had been removed and replaced with a less personal piece from the general royal collection. The change occupied only one typed line, but Camilla understood its meaning immediately. Anne's decision was no longer a private rebuke. It would now be visible through every jewel that was absent whenever the queen consort entered a royal room. Across the household, revised instructions moved quietly from one department to another. Palace dressers, archivists, and protocol officers were forbidden to use, photograph, move, or arrange informal fittings of any restricted piece without Princess Anne's written approval. The collection itself was transferred into a newly inspected secure compartment, its inventory checked item by item and sealed beneath the Princess Royal's custodial authority. What had once been protected by family understanding was now defended by procedure, signatures, and locks. Camilla studied the amended banquet sheet without speaking. The replacement was valuable, dignified, and entirely appropriate, yet that was precisely why it hurt. To her, the monarchy had dressed her in the limits of Queen Elizabeth II's acceptance. King Charles tried to reassure his wife that no guest would know what had originally been planned. Camilla's reply was immediate. She would know, she said, and so would Anne. The king had no answer because both women understood that absence could carry a message more powerful than display. The request had not remained a simple proposal for ceremonial access. Photographs of the forbidden pieces had already been sent to designers, so gowns could be matched to them, suggesting that someone expected approval before it had been formally granted. For the Princess Royal, this was not merely impatience. It looked dangerously close to an attempt to make refusal impossible by allowing plans to advance too far to reverse. Camilla opened the box containing the replacement brooch and held the piece for several seconds. Then she returned it, closed the lid, and told her dresser to leave the room. Her anger had not disappeared, but humiliation was beginning to turn inward. She now had to consider whether loyalty to her staff was worth defending a process that had strengthened every fear Elizabeth once held. At Gatcombe Park, Anne received confirmation that the collection had been secured. She read the message beside an untouched cup of tea. Relief crossed her first, followed by unmistakable sorrow. She had fulfilled her mother's instructions, yet each success pushed her family further apart. The unauthorized photographs changed the dispute completely. Camilla could protect those around her, deny responsibility, and deepen the fracture, or she could finally tell Anne how far the planning had gone and why. That choice led to the first conversation, in which neither title, document, nor royal official could stand between the two women. Here is the next section. Camilla came to Anne without Charles, secretaries, or lawyers. She carried no revised request and offered no argument about rank. Instead, she placed the copied jewel photographs on the table and admitted that her household had acted on her confidence that the king's support would guarantee approval. Anne expected another defense. What she heard instead was an apology, not for wanting the jewels, but for behaving as though Elizabeth's permission no longer mattered. The meeting had been requested privately at St. James's Palace, with Camilla insisting that no aide should attend and no formal record should be taken. Princess Anne agreed only after receiving confirmation that the original application had been permanently withdrawn and that no alternative claim would follow. She entered prepared for careful excuses. Instead, the Queen Consort spoke with a vulnerability Anne had not expected. Camilla admitted that becoming Queen Consort had not erased the years of feeling judged, doubted, and treated as though she remained outside the family's deepest loyalties. Elizabeth's jewels had slowly become more than adornment in her mind. They had become proof of acceptance, a sign she was desperate to possess, because the title alone had never silenced her insecurity. The confession did not excuse what had happened, but it stripped the argument of pride. Anne answered with an admission of her own. Every refusal made her feel as though she were losing her mother again. Enforcing Queen Elizabeth II's restrictions forced the Princess Royal to relive the final responsibilities placed in her hands, transforming grief into duty. Each time someone asked her to surrender a boundary Elizabeth had deliberately protected. Then Camilla addressed the photographs. She had not personally ordered them to be sent to designers, but she accepted responsibility. Her certainty that Charles' support would secure approval had created an atmosphere in which an aide believed permission was inevitable. Anne listened before explaining what had remained misunderstood from the beginning. Her mother had not forbidden Camilla from every private jewel. The restriction covered only those pieces tied to promises, anniversaries, and memories the late queen considered inseparable from her identity. Camilla slid the photograph of the emerald bracelet across the table. For a moment, neither woman touched it. Then she turned the image face down and said, "I will not ask for it again." Anne offered no access and made no promise that the decision would soften. Instead, she poured tea for them both, the first gesture of warmth since the dispute began. Their understanding was fragile, but it was real. Yet private honesty could not contain what was already moving beyond palace walls. The rejected request was becoming a public argument about inheritance, loyalty, and who truly belonged within Elizabeth's legacy. By sunset, the palace had achieved a fragile peace, but beyond its walls, the forbidden jewels had already become the most discussed symbols in Britain. Here is the next section. At dawn, a newspaper front page appeared beneath the headline, Anne guards the Queen's last secret, showing the Princess Royal leaving a memorial service with a single pearl brooch at her collar. By breakfast, broadcasters were debating whether she had protected her mother's wishes or publicly diminished Camilla. Outside Buckingham Palace, a crowd gathered beneath the gates, holding photographs of Elizabeth and handwritten signs, reading, "A promise is still a promise." The palace issued a carefully controlled response, confirming only that Queen Elizabeth II's private collection remained governed by established custodial instructions, and that no constitutional dispute existed. The statement was designed to close the matter. Instead, it widened the conversation. Commentators began explaining the difference between crown property reserved for official use and personal jewels governed by inheritance, memory, and private instruction. What had begun as a family disagreement became a national debate about whether duty meant obeying the dead or protecting the living. Princess Anne watched the coverage with growing discomfort. Public support made her appear victorious, yet she had never wanted a victory over Camilla. Each approving headline reduced a painful responsibility to a contest between two women. The Queen Consort faced something harsher. She was described as rejected, entitled, and overreaching. King Charles suggested releasing a personal statement defending her intentions, but his wife refused. Any protest, she warned, would make the apology to Anne look false and turn a settled boundary into another public battle. Then one exaggerated claim began to collapse. During a live broadcast, a recreated inventory page showed that several famous pieces, repeatedly mentioned in reports, had never appeared in Camilla's application. The discovery exposed how quickly rumor had transformed 3 requested jewels into an imagined attempt to seize Elizabeth's entire legacy. It did not erase the mistake, but it restored a measure of truth. The palace soon announced that Anne would oversee a private historical record explaining the meaning of the protected collection. The jewels themselves would remain secured, beyond ceremonial exploitation, while their stories were preserved for the family's future. Outside Buckingham Palace, an elderly woman placed a small bouquet beneath the railings. Its card read, "For the daughter who kept her mother's word." When the Princess Royal saw the image during a broadcast, she looked away, shaken by praise that felt uncomfortably close to judgment. Camilla turned off her television after hearing a commentator call her the loser. She sat beside Charles and quietly said that accepting a boundary was not the same as being defeated. For the first time, the king understood that his wife was no longer asking him to intervene. The country had chosen Anne as its symbol, but symbols could not decide what happened after the crowds departed. When the headlines faded, the jewels returned to darkness, leaving the two women to decide whether the collection would remain a weapon or become the boundary that finally brought peace. Here is the concluding section. The final decision was entered into the royal archive 3 days later. Princess Anne would remain permanent custodian of Queen Elizabeth II's restricted jewel collection. Camilla would make no further request for the protected pieces, and Charles would not challenge the arrangement. The emerald bracelet, pearl riviere, and diamond fern brooch returned to their secured cases. Yet the true resolution was not found inside the vault. It emerged in the silence after the struggle ended. The palace formally closed every pending application and recorded Camilla's withdrawal as voluntary and permanent. Under the final arrangement, the restricted jewels would be preserved, according to Elizabeth's instructions, and documented carefully for family history. They could appear again only if Anne decided that a specific occasion honored the meaning attached to them. Rank alone would never be enough. When Princess Anne visited the secured collection by herself, she rested her hand briefly against the closed case containing the emerald bracelet. Her mother's command had survived, but the Princess Royal finally understood that protecting Elizabeth's wishes did not require punishing Camilla forever. Duty had demanded firmness. It did not demand endless resentment. At the next state banquet, Camilla wore a different brooch. She offered no explanation and displayed no visible bitterness. The Queen Consort entered the occasion without the protected jewels, and without appearing diminished by their absence. For the first time, she seemed to accept that her position did not require possession of every symbol connected to the late monarch. Weeks later, Anne approved the loan of a separate family brooch for Camilla to wear at a memorial ceremony. It was not part of the forbidden collection, and that distinction mattered. The gesture represented reconciliation without surrender. Soon afterward, a handwritten note arrived from the king's wife, thanking Elizabeth's daughter for defending a promise, even when doing so had caused pain. Anne placed the note inside the custodial file, rather than throwing it away. Before the memorial began, the Princess Royal fastened the approved brooch to Camilla's coat herself. Neither woman delivered a grand apology. They exchanged only a brief look, but it carried what formal statements could not. Anne had never claimed the collection for personal glory, and Camilla had not lost her place within the monarchy. The ruling simply confirmed that royal rank could not erase the private wishes of the woman who had carried the crown for 70 years. Elizabeth's jewels remained forbidden because their value came from memory, not visibility. Anne preserved that truth. Camilla accepted it. Charles allowed his mother's promise to stand. Together, they established a lasting principle. Inheritance does not grant unlimited entitlement, and genuine belonging is demonstrated by respecting what cannot be possessed. The vault closed, the request was withdrawn, and the family walked forward, not because the wound had been forgotten, but because each of them had finally accepted the boundary Queen Elizabeth intended to survive her. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.